I want you to move from overwhelmed by information to confident in what really matters. I want to help you move from being unsure towards direction and purpose in your healthcare. I want to introduce you to health experts. I want to let you in on tough conversations on women's health. I want to give you a place where you can lean in and learn how to take care of yourself. Let's transform your health. Let's get clear on your goals. This is Women's Health Unplugged. I'm your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson, naturopathic doctor. Welcome to another episode of the show. This is Women's Health Unplugged, and I am your host, Dr. Jordan Robertson. Today, I'm joined by a colleague of mine who I absolutely adore online, Dr. Jen Newell, who is a skin... I'm going to call you an expert, Jen. I know we're not supposed to use the word expert to describe naturopathic doctors, but I'm going to use the word expert because I have yet to meet a colleague who has spent as much time and invested in as much energy as you have into understanding the skin and dermatology. Thank you so much for spending time with me today on the show.
Thank you for having me.
I would love for us to start for you to describe your story, which is how we start with all of our guests. And I think it helps us understand why the skin, right? Was this something that you felt so connected to and attracted to that you have basically made this your clinic's entire focus? I would love if you could kind of walk us through your story for getting started in the field of naturopathic skincare.
Mm-hmm. So I joke with people that I fell into being a naturopathic doctor. I had always planned on being a veterinarian or something in the wellness field, but not for humans. And I experienced in my teens, I had your classic teenage acne, which when you're 14, you think is the end of the world. Looking back, I'm like, oh, if only I could time travel and tell myself that this is not the worst it's going to be. And then I did all the things. Not Accutane, but the birth control pill, antibiotics, different restrictive diets, etc., and didn't see a lot of change. The birth control pill at the time managed it a bit, but didn't completely get rid of it. And so I started working a lot on my nutrition, my overall wellness. I just started to be interested in those things. I was working in undergrad. I worked for Aveda, so I was being exposed to skincare products of a different quality than I was seeing at Shoppers Drug Mart or pharmacies. And was learning a lot about ingredients, which I could spend days talking about. And finally started to see the connection between my overall health and how my skin was responding. And basically went through a crisis and had no idea what I wanted to do with my life when I finished undergrad. And my mom and I were at the open house for CCNM. And literally 10 minutes into being there, she looked at me and was like, well, this is what you're supposed to do. So me being your classic daughter was like, you know nothing, Mom. But I enrolled and was there for the start of September and started to actually learn about that connection that I had started self-exploration with regards to my health and my skin. And at that time was like, well, I'm going to go off the pill and see how that goes. And that went horribly. My skin went crazy. Which is why now one of the things I love working with are patients as they're coming off the pill to help them so that they don't experience that trauma of having your skin go absolutely wild and cystic breakouts and that. And it was, again, that realization that I needed to do further exploration as to what would work for me. And also it was rebuilding my confidence. I was so embarrassed by what my skin was looking like that it was hard to even approach salespeople at stores. And so now it's so important to me that we talk about confidence and mental health when it comes to skin health as well.
Amazing. And it's not uncommon for people to have some kind of personal connection or personal experience with their story and why they get so passionate about one particular area. So, and now your clinic focuses mostly on skin health. How is that different than the typical dermatology experience?
What I hear from patients that they appreciate when they come to Connected is that they're actually an active participant in their care plan, that they're included in what we're doing with them. There's a conversation had and they're listened to versus walking into their dermatologist's office, handed a prescription, and then just walking back out again, which they didn't a lot of them say their dermatologist barely even looked at their skin. And that makes me sad for people that is the experience they get, especially when dealing with a concern that is so emotionally draining, exhausting, traumatizing, that they need to be listened to. And that's why Connected is what I created, is that it was an opportunity to build a clinic where hopefully we get some social programming post-pandemic and really work on all of those aspects of rebuilding confidence, self-esteem, and clearing skin.
And so much, because so much of the research about skin actually ties it back into mental health, right? And yet, like I was thinking, when I was thinking about these questions to ask you, I wanted to know what you thought about, like, well, what are the gaps in care? And I think there's probably a few different paths we can go down. But that one path of like the unsupported, like mental health side of dermatology, I think is an area that we have the potential for to do so much good. And yet it's like a completely overlooked part of care.
Yeah, it's because we look at the skin as simply a cosmetic concern and people think it's frivolous. And even patients will come in, they're like, I know it's vain or frivolous to be concerned about this, but this really impacts my day-to-day living. And one of the things that we do is really reassure them that it's not vain, it's not frivolous. It's your perception of what you're experiencing, and that matters. And we have to validate how they're feeling.
So that typical experience that women get then when, they're diagnosed with acne and then offered treatment, like what are we missing from an assessment perspective? Because I know like from a pathology perspective, there's more than one reason why, like more than one underlying reason why women will struggle with acne. And yet, like our solutions are like we've got a handful of solutions and they're kind of all the same. So is that assessment process like when we're talking to women and having that 2-minute appointment and then leaving with a prescription, is that a product of we don't have a lot of answers? Like, everything looks like a nail when all we have is a hammer, whatever that, is that how that statement
I have
goes?
no idea.
No, it's when all you have is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail, right? Like that idea. It's like if we were going to give them the pill either way, then maybe it doesn't matter why their skin is flared up. Like, is that why the experience is like that, do you think?
I think there's a lot of reasons that experience is somewhat lacking for people. Dermatological conditions, whether it's acne or other conditions, are very tricky to fully understand. And it's why I think why that 2-minute appointment is not as thorough is that, gosh, I can't even explain it. It's that there's a lot of possibilities. And so they're looking for the most likely one first. And then if it doesn't work, then they start diving a little bit deeper, hopefully. Except at least in Toronto, I find that the wait time to even get in to see a dermatologist is months. So if we're playing trial and error with someone's skin health, then that's months to years that they could suffer and struggle. And that's just not okay. And I think also it's that there was a lot of bad research originally done on dermatological conditions where they ruled out certain things as being causes, like chocolate. There was a study done on chocolate and acne, and all it looked at was chocolate, like cocoa as the ingredient, but not like sugar or dairy. So when they gave the test subjects, they saw no difference. Well, it wasn't about the cocoa. It's probably more about the sugar. And both groups, the test and the control, had sugar. So of course we didn't see any difference. But from that one study, they were like, okay, diet has nothing to do with skin. And I think there's a lot of gaps in the research that way that are starting to improve again. That is starting to change. So I hope that we will see a shift in care in our conventional systems. And I also am seeing a bigger increase in dermatologists who are starting to show an interest in more of an integrative care approach, which I think is positive.
Yeah, that's really positive. Let's go back to that diet stuff for a second there, because when we've talked about on the podcast multiple times, some of the difficulties we have in studying nutrition, we've talked about things like the replacement effect, right? So, we took out sugar, but we gave them a capsule of some hydrogenated vegetable oil instead, right? Like, which maybe isn't going to show any positive difference. Where is the research leaning on diet and acne?
Yeah, so some of the newer research is showing a difference with regards to dairy, more so with teens and more so with low-fat milk products versus full-fat, which again goes to show possibly sugar content. Lower fat dairies typically carry more sugar or more fillers to make them thicker, which can be carb related. So we're seeing that blood glucose and insulin response contributing to acne, which is really where the research is going. So they're also looking at glycemic load and acne as well, and insulin response. So we are starting to see research that is showing that diet can impact the health of your skin, not just with acne, but with other inflammatory skin concerns like rosacea and topical steroid withdrawal and a number of other things. So it's good that they're still open-minded to study this.
What I think I find so challenging with, suggesting that for patients to take out foods with respect to their skin is that it takes such a long time for them to potentially see the benefit. And we're often taking a food away that like it's always like the food that they love, right? and,
Yes.
and yet it takes so long for them to see that benefit. I mean, do you have some words of encouragement, or what do you tell your clients to expect when they start to pursue some kind of dietary change and then are looking for, some change that's positive in their skin?
Yeah, and skin takes a long time to show change because of the skin cell cycle, that it takes about 28 days for the skin to go from that base dermal layer to the surface of the epidermal layer, that you need at least 3 of those cell cycles to see like new fresh cells at the surface. So that can be really frustrating for people. And I personally don't love giving really restrictive diets to patients. I think the stress of it can be an additional source of problems. I think it errs on potentially causing some like bad relationships emotionally with foods. And so I'd rather put in good things and start loading their diet with healthy things, or balancing things so they can have like the glass of wine on a Friday, or a piece of pizza or some cake at a birthday party, because we want people to live their life too. And I think if we start restricting, it becomes more stressful.
And is it possible for the foods that are triggering to change for people? Like you mentioned there that the acne dairy thing is more prevalent or maybe more impactful in teens. Does that then go away eventually for patients, or what do you notice?
I found that those who are really sensitive to dairy tend to remain quite sensitive, but sometimes it's about where they are when they're consuming it. That's why we hear stories of people who on vacation can eat ice cream no problem. And I think there's a bigger impact of these foods when the body's under a lot of stress, which typically our day-to-day life is quite stressful. So if it's something that we're including in our diet all the time, how these factors are coalescing and integrating and creating that perfect storm plays a role as well. And so I love to get people back to the point where they can have a little bit of dairy in the right situation and not have to stress about it and not worry about it and not see major repercussions. If we can get the skin cells being more resilient, if we can get the body being more resilient, then it should be okay to have your like Haagen-Dazs chocolate peanut butter ice cream on occasion.
I like how you went straight for the Haagen-Dazs example.
Very specific.
Very specific. I know, like, and so thinking about my own journey with my skin, which has been a bit tumultuous of a journey. When I was a student, if I had any dairy, and I'm talking like microns of dairy, I would end up with like massive cystic acne. And I remember I had eliminated it for like 3 months before my wedding. And then at my wedding, like ate all the food at my own wedding. And by the end of the night had like this like huge painful cystic acne that was super flared up. Whereas now, now I'm almost 40 and I eat 3 servings of dairy every single day and have zero impact on my skin. And so I just was curious if like, and I agree with you now that I think about it from that stress perspective, that I just probably like, it was like straw breaking the camel's back at that
Yeah.
time in my life.
It's a tipping point for some. And I see it a lot when there's often these big stressful events that people will see flare-ups in their skin. And I'm like, it's almost like this added stress load makes those things that typically you might be okay with on occasion now that much more impactful on your body. And we see that in a lot of other health conditions as well.
But not easy when we like black and white answers, right?
It's terrible when we like very clear answers. And that's the problem with skin stuff, is like dermatological conditions are very rarely like a yes, no, black or white response. And I'm sure people get frustrated when they're like, okay, would you recommend this for me? And I'm like, well, it really depends. Are you lying on a beach in Hawaii? In which case you're probably fine. Are you on the TTC wearing a mask and super stressed to go to your job as a frontline worker? Yeah, it's probably not a good idea.
But I also like, I think it's healthy for us to develop some like flexibility in the way we think about our health, right? Because ultimately we want our women to be able to like adapt their needs to their current load of life,
Absolutely. And
right?
it's resiliency, and it's figuring out what's worth it, what the possible consequences are, and like being an adult and making your adult decisions. Like when I'm stressed, that's when I want that Haagen-Dazs chocolate peanut butter ice cream. And I know that it's going to lead to breakouts, but sometimes that's worth it.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I want to talk about ingredients. And I want to talk about like you said one of your favorite myths, and I've heard you talk about this online before, is like the myths about what people put on their skin and how toxic that is or isn't. I will say that the conversation around ingredients is one of the most like frustrating to listen to when it comes to acne. Like, and even I know in like my own personal journey, everyone thinks they're an expert on what should topically go on the skin. It's like it's this like, even like I've had like my cleaning lady once recommended what I should put on my skin for my acne. Like everyone feels like they know what this magic cure is, that if you have acne, there's this special thing that you haven't tried and they know what it is, which maybe that's a whole other can of worms. But also this like I find it's just this unevidence-based conversation about
Yep.
what should be going on our skin. And you'll hear like use toothpaste on your acne, use coconut oil on your acne, use nothing on your acne, so I would love for you to sort of set the record straight.
I wish I could be that clear in terms of like, okay, here's the secret, like your cleaning lady. Unfortunately, it's very individualized. Another one of those topics that kind of sucks if you want a black and white answer, because everyone's skin will react to different things in different formulations in different ways. And there's a ton of misinformation and misguidance out there, like the belief that if it's natural, it's better for your skin. Well, no, there's a lot of natural products that are much more likely to be allergenic to the skin and inflammatory, especially at certain amounts. There's a lot of really great synthetic ingredients that are very stable for the most reactive skin. Typically, when I'm looking at skin and ingredients, and it's hard because you can look at an ingredient list and still not know how your skin's going to respond to it because of you might be avoiding comedogenic ingredients, but you might have one in a great formula that's not a problem, or you might have a combination of a few in a great formula that is a problem. And so my sort of go-tos are like, avoid the coconut oil, generally a bad idea.
Myth number one, don't put coconut oil on your face.
Yeah, eat it, enjoy it, don't put it on your face. Just because you can eat something does not mean it should go on your skin. And just because you can eat your skincare doesn't mean you should. And I see companies market that way. They're like, it's so clean, you can eat it. But why would you? You probably shouldn't. Same goes. If you can eat it, you probably doesn't mean it has to go on your skin. But coconut oil, definitely, especially in like warm or cold climates like we are here in Toronto, when you think about what it turns into in your cupboard in winter, that like solid rock of coconut oil, if you think about what that would do on a pore in cold weather as well, that it becomes like this solid plug, it's probably not the best choice. And then I've heard companies tell me that like organic coconut oil doesn't cause breakouts. Like, it's a farming method. Your skin has no idea how this product was farmed, nor does your skin cells care how it was farmed. Ethically, yes, I care, but my skin does not know how that farmer, what they sprayed on things. So definitely coconut oil is one that I'm generally like, avoid that on your skin. It's also not even that moisturizing if you're using it on your body. Let's be honest, there are better options out there. And then there are certain things that I'll look for in commercially prepared products is things like myristic acid or myristate. That one seems to be pretty consistently pore clogging for people, especially depending on how much of it's in a formula or if there's two versions of it. And also like the whole like DIY your skincare. If you DIY it, it's safer. There's a lot of things that you should not just DIY because they'll get moldy, they're not stable. Lemon juice is a bad idea on your face. So is baking soda. And again, just because you can make it in your kitchen does not mean it's safe to put on your face. So it's interesting because there is no clear like black and white yes, no for skin. Because you'll also always get these anecdotes where people are like, but I did this for years and my skin is perfect. That person is very genetically blessed. I'm a person like if I even like eat coconut oil and it dribbles on my face, I will likely get a breakout. But then you see people who slathered it on when they were younger and they were fine. So it's not a clear 100% like yes, no answer. One of the things I do with patients is regularly go through their skincare products and try and figure out what might be causing the problem, even if they've used it for years. Because they might be like, this I've used for 20 years, I've had no problems. I'm like, but you're coming in complaining of acne that you've had for 20 years. So there's something that's not working for you. So let's try and figure that one out. And there's also such a personal association with our skincare products. Some people like the texture of the product they're using and hate the alternative. And so we also have to work with that as well as like personal preferences.
I remember I had this experience of getting an all natural skincare line at one point, and it like the packaging was beautiful. The picture on the front was this woman like in a field of flowers, and I was like, I want to be her. I bought the whole line. I used it, and the like amount of seasonal allergy symptoms that I ended up with from slathering on all of these flowers on my face. And I was like, Jordan, what are you doing? Like, you know so much better about so many areas of medicine. And yet this, you just kind of left it up to the picture on the front and bought products that had some of your seasonal allergies in it and then literally like put it in your eye.
Yeah, and that happens. I will say I'm a person who is 100% swayed by great packaging.
Oh, it
and
kills
like beautiful marketing. Like I am that sucker who will buy things. I'm like, it's pretty. I don't even care.
I feel so feminine with my puffy, swollen, bloodshot eyes.
Yeah, but we often like women will persist. Like I get so many that come into my office and they're like, they just love their product, but it's very clearly causing problems, but they love it. Like I get ocular rosacea around my eyes anytime I use like purple eyeshadow. Something about purple, but I love it. And I'm so convinced that one day I will find that purple eyeshadow that doesn't trigger that inflammatory response that I keep persisting. I'm not a quitter.
But I think you brought up an important point there about like anecdotal evidence in skincare, right? And I think that's where like bringing up my cleaning lady who told me, actually, I think she told me to put coconut oil on my face. It's so funny. But we fall back on anecdotal evidence in this area for some reason. And I think we do in other areas of women's health too. I think women's health is particularly sensitive to anecdotal evidence. So for those of you that are listening, what we mean by anecdotal is you've got the one girlfriend who swears by this one thing she does. And now we feel like that's good enough evidence that we should do it too. Where even if like the studies on like en masse that are studying thousands and thousands of women point to some other answer, we know someone who has done it and who has benefit, and that feels more attractive actually than doing maybe what's been researched in women we don't know.
Yeah. Well, and we see that all the time, and that's been the rise of like the TikTok stars and the Instagram experts, is that they're sharing what works for them, but it does not guarantee that it'll work for anybody else. And so when I even get patients or people regularly ask me like, well, what do you use on your skin? I'm like, yeah, but what I use does not automatically work for you. So you're very different people with very different experiences and very different like histories. And so that anecdotal evidence even falls into what our practitioners do. And I hear practitioners say like, well, I use this and it's great, so you should use it. Mm-hmm. I wish it was that simple.
Mm-hmm. Make our lives way easier if it was that
simple.
Oh
my God, it would be so much easier. But it is, honestly, it's a decent starting point. Because a lot of the times with skincare formulations, the research is looking more at like a single ingredient and what it can do, and not an entire formulation of say like 20 to 50 ingredients in combination in different quantities and what that does. Because one ingredient could be great at 20%, but it's in your formula at 0.5. And so it's probably not going to have much of an impact. Or it might be great at like 1%, but it's in this formulation now at like 50. So now it's becoming a possible irritant. And so it's interesting to see, because even the research, like companies, when they create products, can do limited research and like give it to people and say like, test it on women. And 89% of people saw a difference. And like they gave it to 10 people, like 8.9 of them saw a difference and were paid for it. And so it's marketing and actual research are really blurry now, especially in the skincare industry.
Mm-hmm. So no to coconut oil. Are there any other just hard no's that we need to add to that list? You mentioned baking soda.
Baking soda, it's a common one. I see it a lot in a lot of DIY face scrubs and masks. It's a really bad idea. The pH is really wrong for our skin because baking soda it's a base. It's basic. It's alkaline. Our skin is naturally acidic. And so when you put something that neutralizes that acidity, now you've made your skin much more vulnerable to irritation. And you've basically destroyed that barrier and that acid mantle that is on the surface of the skin that is there to protect you.
And is that happening even if you don't get like a mad rash, right? So I'm
Yeah,
thinking about all my DIY skin people who think it's working. Is it having like a microscopic impact on their skin even if they don't think it is?
absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. It's one where it's causing tiny amounts of damage that down the road you might find out about because now you've got problems. When you get rid of that acid mantle or that microbiome that we have on the skin, you might not notice the first time you do it. But like 10 years down the road, when you're now suffering from more acne because you have no defense system up and those bacteria can now flourish and your skin is dry and dehydrated and flaking, well, we need a barrier. And we've spent years like scrubbing and burning it off. I see that too when people love like going for peels at their medi spas and they do it quite often, which your skin looks really good after typically once you shed, but you've taken off your defense layer. And so eventually there are consequences to that could be worse than the benefit.
So how does the like so now that we've tried to bust some of the myths, so no coconut oil, no DIY, and would you throw essential oils into that same camp with the DIYs?
It depends. It depends on the person. It depends on the quantity. I see essential oils are so popular right now that I see a lot of people way overdoing them. So we're seeing more sensitization of the skin, more allergies. And I think it's because we're just layering them on in so many different ways. Plus, a lot of people are getting their advice from the person who sells them their essential oils who maybe isn't qualified. Um, they might be very well researched, but a lot of the times it's the mom down the street who is like, this will cure everything, put it on. And I've seen like essentially chemical burns on children because people put essential oils neat on their skin to act like polysporin or something. And I think there's a time and a place for everything. And unfortunately, essential oils are very popular. I think in very well formulated, stable forms, they can be okay for some people. But again, we're seeing a huge increase in sensitivity to them.
So how can a woman even get started thinking about what she's putting on her skin? Like, is it about learning about the ingredients? Is it about tracking her symptoms? Is it about talking to someone? Like, how does she move forward essentially with
Yeah.
her skincare?
I always recommend talking to somebody who is qualified in the skincare world, whether it's like a naturopath like me who's done a ton of continuing education, whether it's a dermatologist who actually will share information and has the time, or a really fantastic esthetician. They are actually very well qualified in terms of skin advice. So I think there's a lot of people out there who can give a good starting point for people. And I tend to tell people like, if you're going to start playing with products, because they're fun, skincare products are fun. And so you shouldn't be afraid to play with them. Start simple. You don't need a 17-step Korean skincare routine where you've got 8 different acids and 4 different moisturizers that you layer, or like you're slugging, which is where people put like Vaseline over their moisturizer at night where it looks shiny like a slug. You might not need that. Just keep it very simple to start. Introduce one thing at a time and see how your skin does, and give it the time to make a difference. Typically, that's a few months. But it's very tempting to buy like a full routine and just like change it all up in one shot. I get it. I'm that person. I'm tempted by it all the time. Every
Especially
time
if
I
it's
do
in
it,
pretty packaging.
it's in gorgeous packaging. Forget it. I'm sold. But if you keep it simple, generally you can actually gauge how your skin is doing with something with enough time.
So 2 to 3 months, you're suggesting then, like if you're going to make a change to some of those ingredients, you're probably looking at 2 to 3 months to have the impact.
Yeah, because you have to shed the skin you've already generated. So it has to turn over. And don't try to speed up the process by just like burning it off. You need your skin. Sometimes I see people who like peel off their corneocytes or the keratinocytes, which are those outer layers of skin cells, because we think they're old and dead, but they're actually serving a purpose. They're there as a protective layer. And when people like burn them all off, I'm like, it's basically like leaving your teenager home unattended for a week and thinking they're not going to host a party and trash your house. You've got immature skin cells now that are at the surface and they're not able to make good choices.
People are burning it. Like, how are they burning it off? This is I've a lot.
Just like really strong chemical peels.
Got
A
it.
lot of acids are being used right now because of brands that are coming out with like singular ingredient acids. And like there's trends like on TikTok of using these things and using them really wildly inappropriately, where you put them on and leave them on way too long. And while it might be okay for like the 15-year-old TikTok star, it's maybe not a best choice for like the 37-year-old woman at home.
And so I've joked on Instagram before about the like teenage acne clearing up just as about your time to turn menopausal. Like what causes the persistence of acne for women beyond those teenage years? Like I think, you've opened the conversation to talk a little bit about, what's happening with our skincare routine, which I think is important. Touched a little bit on the fact that just like nutrition in general, like basic health is having an influence on skin health. That stress has a huge impact on skin health. But are there any other mechanisms for why we have teenage acne when we're 39 asking for a friend?
Yeah, hormones, they play a role. And the frustrating part for women is that like you can do hormone testing and those numbers can come back perfectly normal and you're like, well, it's not hormonal. But there's local receptors to those hormones in your skin that even at normal levels, it could be higher in that area and showing a response. So things like 5-alpha reductase, DHT, DHEA, a loss. I see a lot of women with low estrogen with acne. And they're like, but my estrogen isn't high. Why is my acne there? I'm like, because now your skin is thinner and androgens are not balanced well. And so it's the balance between the hormones as well as local receptors that we can't measure with blood tests, which is also frustrating.
And is that genetic? Like what percentage of that is genetic, do we think?
I think there's a huge impact of genetics and acne. And I get a lot of people who come in and they're like, oh, my mom and dad never had acne. I'm like, yeah, but genes, there's times where those genes can shift. And it doesn't mean guaranteed that it's not a genetic component contributing. But I would say most acne is this genetic tendency for the cells to turn over a lot more quickly in terms of like clogging the pores with excess cells, and also a tendency to generate more oil and sebum and respond to those hormones at the receptor sites. I want to say like 70 to 80% of acne definitely having some form of genetic component. It's why people talk about acne and say like those who are acne prone, you can never really cure acne, you can manage it, but you will likely always be someone who is acne prone, which I also think is really sad to hear as someone who is acne prone. I'm like, I've got it pretty well managed. I wouldn't say I have acne now, but I could probably very easily slide back if I wasn't cautious or wasn't like constantly diligent with things.
We talked about this a little bit off camera, Jen, before we hit record. I asked you one of the conversations that we're kind of not having about skin. And the thing that you mentioned that sort of stood out to me is that, skin and acne is actually a disease state. Can you elaborate on that a little bit more?
Yeah, so I think because it's something that occurs on the skin, and much like any other skin concern, we consider it vain, superficial, and purely cosmetic. And I think that's a misjudgment on a lot of people's part. And even insurance companies will say if it's not extremely disfiguring, it's a cosmetic concern and not a disease concern, which again, I think is ludicrous because it's an infection. Acne is an inflammatory concern that leads to an infection in the skin. So I don't know any other infections that aren't considered diseases. So it's an interesting conundrum that we get caught up in that, I mean, even within our college regulations and CRA and government that say if it's not extremely disfiguring acne, we should be charging HST and it shouldn't be something that can be claimed on people's insurance. But as naturopaths, there's a lot of things that people come to see us for that aren't disfiguring or not immediate concerns, but are still really important that we address.
Yeah, because doesn't that just like undermine their experience completely, right? To say that, like, even as an insurance company, to say that it's not bad enough for that to be considered to be medically necessary. And so therefore it is quality of life slash cosmetic slash
Not important.
not important. Yeah.
Yeah, it's completely demeaning. And it means that it causes more stress and anxiety for women. And I think it's because there is a whole cosmetic field of medicine of like things that aren't considered necessities. But there's also a really blurry line of what would be if, like, say a facial will clear up the acne, is that a medical treatment or a cosmetic treatment? And so it's an interesting, like, where do we draw a line? And I don't think there's an actually great answer out there.
Mm-hmm. It's like one of those like kind of unspoken expenses in medicine for women as well, right? That women have this expectation that their skin's going to cost them a fortune.
Absolutely. Yeah.
When, yeah, and it's funny because I had this experience with a patient the other week where I was having it like compounding a shampoo for her with some prescription ingredients and some non-prescription ingredients. And I was prefacing that it was going to be this like highly expensive experience for her to have this compounded shampoo. And when we got the quote back, it was like a fraction of what she would have normally, what she was spending on her whole sort of like skin cosmetic regime, but
Mhm.
yet it was more expensive than some of the supplements we had talked about. Like, I just find that such an interesting line, like you're talking about, that like cosmetically, women will look at a jar of face cream for $100 and be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense.
Yep.
And yet, when we talk about, a $25 bottle of vitamin D, do we raise our
Yeah.
eyebrows at the cost, right? Like, what's your experience with all of that? What do you think?
It's interesting because I see a lot of people that, because we go through skincare products and things like that they're used to drugstore brands and drugstore prices, which there are some fantastic products that come at a drugstore price, which are great. But then I have people who come in and they'll spend like $150 on a serum. But if I recommend like an omega-3 that might be $80 for 2 months, they're like, no, that's very expensive. And it's an interesting like priorities and expectations that we've been trained to look at. Like, and it's interesting because it's different for women than men too, as well. And that's because the prices differ for women to men for a lot of things, like skincare products. Men's products are generally less expensive. They could have the same ingredients, cheaper packaging, and cost significantly less.
Is that called the pink razor tax? Have I heard
I
that?
think so. And I've seen that. And like, that's one of my favorite things to do on Twitter is call out companies for that. But like, for instance, like Dove deodorant, their women's one is half the size of the men's and it's double the price. And the ingredients are identical. Identical.
It's interesting
That's,
because it's such an area that like we just don't talk about, right? I've had this conversation with other guests about the cost of medicine for women and just this unspoken part of the conversation that like we now have like an incredibly distressing slash disfiguring part of medicine that we're maybe not willing to call a disease state and cover with insurance,
mhm.
slash we're not going to spend a lot of time even talking to her about how her health and wellness could impact this condition for years to come. And she has this absolute expectation of dumping her, like emptying her wallet over products that may or may not help, right?
Yeah.
Like it just, I can't even think of a topic that like brings up so many areas about like issues in women's health as this conversation.
Well, and also too, the things that they're offered from the dermatologist to treat that same condition that for us might be considered cosmetic. So when you see a dermatologist for non-disfiguring acne, like you can get that covered, you can get birth control covered to treat it, but working with like nutritional supplementation and internal work, now it's a cost out of pocket. And so it makes it tough. And especially when people are on a budget and being conscious with their finances, like you get that stress.
I love this conversation, Jen. Like I think you've done some good things for us. Like bring up trying to help us understand the diet piece, because so often when I work with women who've either worked with other practitioners or they've tried some kind of like online DIY program for skin, has often really restricted what they think is our safe foods when it
Yeah.
comes to their skin, which I think is always more damaging than helpful.
Yep.
But at least gave some context for some things that we maybe need to think about, right? Like the dairy piece, the sugar, um,
And
this.
doing it in moderation. It doesn't have to be a black, white, yes, no. It could be situational. It could be just taking a moment to check in where you're at, and then it could be fine.
Yeah. Or it's that replacement effect, right? Like if that Haagen-Dazs ice cream sandwich bar or whatever it is that Jen loves is replacing your fruits and vegetables, then maybe we have way more of a problem with it than if it's on top of your regular healthy diet.
Exactly. Exactly. I think there's a big conversation that has to happen about what a person typically does and how we can improve upon that without making it restrictive feeling deprived or creating an emotional impact with the changes that we're making.
Right. Because it's not helpful if you avoid ice cream like all week only to like dump your face in the container on Saturday nights because you just can't take it anymore.
Yeah. Or to have it and then like beat yourself up over it. Like that's not a good state to be in either, where you're feeling guilt and shame and upset and anger. And that's awful to feel over something so seemingly small as ice cream.
And then I like this conversation about like, natural is not always better when it comes to skincare. And people need to think about just where that like information is coming from. Kind of touched on how like everybody and their mother thinks they can comment on your skin, which is a whole other situation. But also to that like that anecdotal evidence and sharing of what's worked for me in air quotes is often what passes this information from woman to woman when that's not always that helpful.
Yeah. And there's also a lot of resources that I see in the natural world that we kind of rely on that often aren't based in good science, unfortunately, but they make it look like they are. So things like Environmental Working Group and the Think Dirty website, like they're a great starting point, but it's also about looking at the research and the studies that they're basing their recommendations on. And some of them just aren't great studies and aren't applicable to how we would use an ingredient or a product and versus how that study used it.
And do we absorb 60% of things through our skin that we put on it?
No. That's like one of my biggest pet peeves that I still see promoted by people, and it makes me enraged at times that absorption and penetration are very different, and everything has a different absorption rate. The molecule size impacts the ability to be absorbed. The like quality and health of the skin makes a difference, and so it's not so simple as just being like 60%, because that it's just a number someone came up with and we ran with it.
I think that's green. Is it greenwashing? I don't know if that's the right term for it.
I think it's just misinformation that got popular. It's just wrong.
But it's that idea that like natural is better, green is better, less toxic is better.
Yeah. Well, because we look at like there's things like there's like Death by Rubber Ducky, that book that made us worry about everything they found in our bloodstream. And I'm like, but just because it's in there does not mean it's harming the body or having a physiological action. Just might be there. And I don't think we've ever studied for like, is this like natural ingredient? Has the, I don't know, coconut oil I put on my skin, is that now in my bloodstream? I don't think there's ever been a study to try and measure that. But I think we'd be shocked to find out that like natural things wind up there too. And it doesn't mean they're bad.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. So there's some good advice there, I think, like around like the DIY stuff needs to be taken with a grain of salt. Mm-hmm. But also that when we expect to see change or when we make those changes, that slow and steady approach is probably the best, and we shouldn't expect those results to come much sooner than that sort of 3-month mark. Hey.
Yeah. Well, and it's like anything with naturopaths. Like we went to naturopathic college. We did not go to Hogwarts. I'm not Harry Potter. I can't make things better the next day. I wish I could. That'd be amazing. But it's not magic. It's time. And that's what we need to see and be patient with. And that's some of the hardest thing. I'm not a patient person. And so it's one of the hardest things for people is to wait, because I'll change up people's plans. And like a week later, I get a panicked email that nothing has changed. I'm like, it's literally been a week. We need to calm down and just like settle in. And that's where we look at the mental health aspect of it. Like, do we need to do some psychological work? Do we need to do some mental health and anxiety work as well?
And that's that last point that I was going to kind of come around to, is that I think what you've done a good job of sharing with us today is that this is not vanity, that this is health, right? That this is not just quality of life. This is medicine.
Yes.
Right. How should, first of all, I want to say thank you for having this conversation with us, but also like, what's your big message for women? Like, I know that your focus on skin health is so obvious, especially online. And we're going to put links to how people can get in touch with you and how they can follow you for more myth busting on Instagram, which I love. But what's your big take home message for women who are listening about their skin health and their health in general?
That it matters. that I think so often we brush symptoms and concerns under the rug or think that they don't matter, either from experiences with other medical professionals that made us feel like it didn't matter, but it matters. If it's impacting you, then let's do something about it, because there's no reason to struggle or suffer with it. And it might just be about reaching out to the right person at the right time that can make a huge impact on how you're feeling.
That idea that it's not like just your skin.
No, it's not just your skin. It's a whole lot of other pieces. It's your confidence, your ability to go out into the world and like kick ass and feel good doing it.
Amazing. Thank you so much for spending time with us today, Jen. How can people get in touch with you and your clinic?
Yeah, so they can find us at connectedhealthandskin.com or follow me on Instagram at NewellND. I share a lot of information. All my best information is on Instagram. And then they can always reach out to me through either of those methods as well.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Jen.
You're welcome. It was a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed that episode of Women's Health Unplugged. It's my absolute passion to bring women quality and science-informed information about their health so that they can make empowered, good decisions about their health care. I'd like to invite you to join me in my Facebook community, Women's Health Unplugged. There we share live videos, blog posts, and behind-the-scenes information about the podcast, where you can connect with me and other women who are interested in their health care. You can find us at facebook.com/groups/WH Unplugged. We'll see you there.